here before we showed up, but then he told me he actually flew all the way over to the Western Province into a place called Ballymo, and he told me that he had to go there because Adventist Frontier Missions did tell him to prove if we have to have a missionary with the Gogodala people. And then he told me that he wants to go with me again. Can he do that? And I said, yes, we can. And then we did get our flight scheduled the very next day on Friday. But what he did learn was that there were 25 villages up and down the Aramea River with just a little more than 30,000 people. And he only learned that there were 2 Gogodala people who were already members of our church. And those 2 were living there in Ballymo. Well, we did get a flight scheduled on Friday, and when we showed up, we got out of the airplane, we just walked over past some fence, and then I just realized that they don't have any buildings anywhere there. Just a place where an airplane can just show up there, a runway. Well, that was actually created by America during World War II against Japan. But because everyone could see us now, somebody walked over and said to Dale, why are you back here in Ballymo? And he said, I'm here because I have to show this person where to start the Gogodala Mission Project with Adventist Frontier Missions. And then he said, I'm the one who is driving that one truck right back there. Both of you can get in and I will drive you into Ballymo. Well, we got in this truck. It would have taken us an hour and 30 minutes to walk where he actually drove us to. But when we showed up there, we parked his car, we got out. Somebody then just immediately came outside of some small store there. His name was Roy Bialma. Roy was the only Gogodala person who ever created any store there in Ballymo. He was the richest person. He actually is the only one who had a vehicle there. And that's what picked us up at the airport. But when he came outside to get his key from his employee for his truck, he then asked me a question, why are you here in Ballymo? And I just told him, oh, I'm here because our family is the one starting the Gogodala Mission Project with Adventist Frontier Missions. And just 2 seconds after I said that, he told me, you are my missionary. And now you can live in that house I'm building now right down this road. That is the house that he gave us to live in. Then he told me why I was his missionary. He told me that 2 weeks before I showed up, he actually did fly all the way to Port Moresby. When he was there, he met his brother Silva. And his brother told him, Roy, you have to close your store on Sabbath. And then what Roy told me was, now he does agree with his brother, and his store has now been closed for 2 Sabbaths. We then did live there in Ballymo for only 6 months. But then our family, we moved to Kotali Village. We then had someone, his name was Thomas. He actually built us a little bush house to live in. But then for some reason I asked Roy before we left to go there, when are you getting your walkabout sawmill? He says, oh, it's going to be here in December, and you were going to get the first wood. And then he just said, I'm going to create something that you can make a really good house in Kotali Village. He made all the 2x4s, every bit of wood that we needed. But he never charged me anything for it. So after we now were there in Kotali Village, we lived there for 4 years and 5 months. And the reason we had to leave and come back to America is because my wife almost died. She's sitting right there. I had to take her to Ballymo to go to the hospital. They don't have any doctors there, but they did have nurses. But I also did have a satellite phone, but when I was there, it didn't work. So then I had to tell her I have to go back to our village to use our ham radio to call the pilot, Les Anderson, to ask him to come and pick us up and take us to a real hospital in Port Moresby. After I called him, the next day I came back and I did tell her he is coming to pick us up tomorrow to take us there. But then she told me something else too. She said that some guy showed up at 6 o'clock that morning. What he did, he had already been letting me meet him once a week to study the Bible with him. And then he told her that he has now keeping the Sabbath. But he then told her an angel showed up last night and told him he had to tell her two things. And the very first thing he had to tell her was, no, you will not die. And the second thing he had to tell her was, and your mission project will go forward. And because the word Bekele means rock, that's the foundation. Well, we did travel to Port Moresby, but the doctor there couldn't tell us what her problem was, what her issue was. We even went to Australia, went to an Adventist hospital there. They couldn't even tell her what problem she was having. But then, when she was now living in Australia still, but I would travel back and forth, one day she just decided to pray and ask God, do we have to go back to America? She then just told him, if we do, then you just tell someone to email Jeff and ask him to become a teacher again in America. And the very next day, when I was in Port Moresby, I got that email. Someone asked me to be a teacher again. That is why we then agreed to come back to America. But then she did learn. She may not want me to tell you this, but she did get Lyme disease. That's why we did have to come back to America. But that's what happened, and we were only there for almost 5 years. But everything that guy, and his name was Owasi, everything he told her did happen, because no, she has never died. And our project did go forward. We did have one other family that came 3 years after we were there to be missionaries too. They did move over to Ballymo. But then 2 years later, in 2004, David and Cindy White showed up. They were now missionaries. And in 2007, Stephen and Lori Erickson showed up. They then now were living in my house too. And then Stephen and his wife moved back to Ballymo. But then someone told him, we do have property in Kiwa that you can have too. Well, that's the very next village, next to Kotala village, so that's what he decided to do, to go there, and now that's where he was living. In 2021, Jason Slider also became a missionary too for our Gogodala project. He is a pastor up in Michigan, and now he is there too. But even the Ericksons are still there too. So now there's still 2 missionaries there. But something else went forward about our mission project too. Last year in April, I was at a hospital waiting to see a doctor. And while I was there were several people in that room where I was sitting down. Some girl, she was about early 20s, she showed up. She sat down right where I was and she asked me a question. What is your favorite song? And I said, it's Wawa God, our Gogodala Mission Project song. Well, because I told her I was a missionary, I asked her, do you want me to share some mission stories with you? And she said yes, so I told her 2 stories. And After I told her that second one, she just stood up and said, I have to go see Michelle. Well, then that same day, Michelle had to see me too, because I already now heard her name. I asked her, do you want to hear my mission stories too? And she said, oh, no, my friend already told me everything you told her. But then I just asked her, okay, can I just tell you Daniel chapter 7? And she said, yeah, you can do that. So then I shared that with her. And the very last thing that she told me was, you are still a missionary. I never thought anyone in America would say I was a missionary. But because she said that, I said, well, do you want me to mail you the documents that I've already written so you can learn even more than I just shared with you? And she said yes. And after I sent them to her, she then sent a text message 1 week later. And what she said was, I have now read everything you have written. But the last thing she said was, you have to write a book. I never, ever thought about writing a book about my documents. But then, I then decided, yes, I am going to do that. But our church, Portland Church, they told me several months earlier that I had to write a book too about our mission project. So then, last year in May, I went down to Georgia to teach services. Teach services are Seventh-day Adventists. And they did tell me that they definitely will do both of my books. Well, because we were missionaries in New Guinea, I wanted to go back and meet my friends again. So in 2006, I did go back. And then in 2011, I went the second time. In 2020, our daughter Stacy and then her daughter Bailey and I were all going back again. But 1 week before we were leaving, COVID showed up and we couldn't go. Well, because COVID was almost done last year, I decided that yes, in January this year, I want to go back. But now because I'm going back this year in January and they've already told me to write that book, I just wondered, do I need to make a smaller one that I can print so I can take it and share it with my Gogodala friends when I show up there? I then decided that yes, that's what I'm going to do. And so that's the book that I did. I actually printed 400 and put in a suitcase, but then it weighed 49 pounds, so, because I was wanting to take 1,000 with me, but I couldn't do that because my other suitcase only could get 300 in it. But I did decide to take 700 of these books to show my friends in New Guinea. But then last year in November, someone actually texted my wife. Her name is Karen. She was our student missionary back in 1998 when we were in Kotali Village. Her boyfriend was also a student missionary that year with Dale Goodson. They even talked a lot on our ham radio. But they did get married, and then they became missionaries too in 2017 in New Guinea. And because the Ericksons told her that I'm coming back, that's why she sent us a text message and said that she wants to see me again. And what she learned was, because she does sometimes travel over to a place called Wewak, she now learned that I was even going to go to Wewak too. Here in America, that would be the Washington State. It's the very far west and north part of that country. The reason I wanted to go to Wewak is because in 2001, I went to a conference meeting and I said a word, vanilla. And then after the meeting, I was walking out and somebody was sitting down there. He was 25 years old. His name was Obed. He was being trained how to be a pastor there. And he just told me, do you want vanilla to start a vanilla project? And I said, yes, I do. And then he told me he already started one up near Wewak at his uncle's property. and that he would tell him to give me 100 cuttings. But that's why now I wanted to go up there to see the people who helped me start the Vanilla Project. And Pastor Obed is now the pastor at Pacific Campus University, and he even told me, when I show up, he wants to travel with me too. But that's why now Karen knows that we're coming up there. But she told me one other thing that I have never, ever learned. She said, when I show up at the airport in Port Moresby, I can get a SIM card to put on my phone. And then my phone will work in New Guinea. I never knew that before. Well, then after she told me that, I then decided to go there because she wants me to call her, because they did say they want to be the ones to pick us up when we show up in WEWAC. When I got there, it was on January 10, Pastor Obed picked me up, and I asked him, where do you get a SIM card? And he said, oh, it's the Digicel company. They took me right over to where those people are. But then that person told us, no, we don't have any SIM cards. I then wondered, why can't I get a SIM card that Karen said I could get? But then Pastor Obed told me, there is a Digicel company here in Port Moresby that definitely does have SIM cards. I will take you there right now. We then, right that minute after we learned we didn't have one, we went, got in his car, and drove over there. But when we showed up there on that property, he got out very quick and went right over to the entrance. I learned that it was a very big building that had about a dozen stores inside. But then when I now was walking over there to be with him, he turned around and came back and just told me something. There is not one store in here that's open until 9 o'clock. And because it's right now 8:40, we're going to have to stay outside. We then walked over and stood right by his car. And then all of a sudden, he saw somebody looking at me who looked very confused, upset. He then asked that person, what is your problem? And then that guy asked him a question. What he said was, why does that white guy right over there have the word Bekele on his shirt? Well, Pastor Obed knew why I had it on my shirt, but he told him, you can go and talk to him, he'll tell you why. Well, when I traveled in 2006 and in 2011, I only ever was gone for 2 weeks to be there and come back. But now this year I was going to be there for 2 months. And I just wondered, what do I have to wear for 2 months while I'm there? I then contacted, it's called Uber Prints, and they then were able to make shirts for me that I wanted, just pictures of our mission project to take with me over there. I even created 11 different pictures to put on my shirts. These are the first 3 that I did. The first one is me and our Gogodala father, Wolfie. The next one is our house. But the third one is John Pundari. I met him in 2011, but the reason I had to meet him was because in December of 1997, our family did travel back to Port Moresby. We were at Pacific Adventist University, and on that Sabbath, we did go to their church. But then someone said, today we have a guest speaker. His name is John Pundari, and he was elected a few months ago as the Speaker of Parliament. Well, after he preached his sermon, he was now standing right outside the church shaking people's hands. And I had to shake his hand, so I walked out, and the very second that he got my hand, he did this. And I didn't know why he wasn't looking at me. But then, I don't know how many seconds later it was, he did look at me. And the very first thing he ever said to me was, thank you so much for starting your mission project out in the Western Province. Something else happened later where he told me Every time I ever show up in Port Moresby, I have to meet him. But that's why I just wanted to have that shirt with me too, because I wanted to meet him too. But this is the shirt that I actually had on when I showed up there. Last year, my wife, Bobby, and I, we went to North Carolina to go see some mountains. We were driving down Highway 40, and all of a sudden I saw that sign there that said Obed River. I was so excited that my friend Obed has a river here in Tennessee. I then, when I got home, looked it up and saw a picture on the website of the river with rocks in it, and I even emailed those to him and told him, we have a river in America with your name on it, with me in it, with my Gogadala name, these rocks. But that's why, because I knew he was the one picking me up at the airport, I had to wear that shirt to show up. And that's why it said McKaylee, and that guy saw that and just wondered, why does that white person have that on his shirt? Well, he came over and talked to me. I told him that we started the mission project in '97, and then he told me, well, the reason I know that word, you know how many languages they have in New Guinea? There's more than 850 different languages. But he did know that word. And the reason he told me he knew that word was because he grew up in Kotali Village with his brother Raymond.
Wow.
I didn't know I was going to meet my friend Raymond's brother. Raymond was the one that did the most things ever with our church and our family in our mission project. And I was so surprised that now I met my friend Raymond's brother. If you even watch the video called The People Between, it does have on there a video of Raymond. He even talks about what he did for us. But now because he was a Gogadala person, I had to give him my book. But right after I gave him my book, something else happened. There were so many more people who came over and said, can I have your book too? There was even 4 more people that got it and kept walking right down the road. That now convinced me why I could not get a SIM card at the airport. Because now 10 people in just 1 hour when I showed up now had the book that I took there. After I got my SIM card, I did ask Pastor Obed something. I just asked him, how can I meet John Goddard? He told me I have to meet him every time I ever show up here. He told me that there is some property now where John has built a lot of houses. He has people renting those from him, and he even built a church there. It's only 3 miles past Pacific Avenue University. So then he told me, I will take you there today too. What he wanted to do was go there and see if there was anybody there who could give him the phone number of the pastor so that he could call the pastor and tell him, please, tell John that Jeff is back here. Well, when we got there, what happened was there was not one person who could tell him the number of the pastor. We then walked out of the church and we're standing right by 2 small rooms. They were radio show rooms, but you could see in every single room. While we were standing there, for some reason, some person got up and walked out of that second room and started walking right over to us. She showed up and asked Pastor Obed a question. Why are you here on John Kundari's property? And he said, I'm here because that missionary needs to let John know that he is back. But then she asked him a question. What she said was, is that Jeffrey Bishop? And he said, yes, it is. She then walked right over where I was and said, you are Jeffrey, right? And I said, yes. Well, she then told me that when she was 3 years old, I met her. She told me that everything that I did with her, she just loved it. she even told me I gave her some toys that she could play with, and she said that she did play with a lot of them for very many years. But then she told me she had been wanting to see me. I thought it was that, but it's on yours there. Look at yours. Your
Your
laptop
screen.
right there.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
But then, she told me that she had been wanting to see me her whole life again. And now she was very excited that she saw me. Well, then I decided I have to give her my book too. Well, right after I gave her this one, she just told me to sign it. But then, I just thought of something else too. I was only going to be there for 1 week in Port Moresby. Then I thought, if I'm not going to see John Pundari, because there's a story in my book about him, I want him to be able to get this book. And so I then just decided to give her that one too. Only 3 days later, she sent me a text message, and what she told me was she now has read my book, and she saw someone's name in it called Silva. She told me he was her best friend. He even drives her anywhere she has to go. Well, now because she knows him, I got his phone number. And I called him and he said, yes, I am going to come and see you today at the university. I only met him for about an hour and 30 minutes, but I did learn something else. He told me that he actually became a Seventh-day Adventist just 3 years before we showed up. And then he told me that he had been sharing that with his brother, Roy, for a long time. But now I learned that God convinced him to tell Roy Biamo to close his stores on Sabbath only 2 weeks before we showed up.
Wow.
And now I learned that he had known about the Sabbath for a long time. But that then just made me so excited that I met her when she was 3 years old. But 4 weeks later, she sent another text message to me. This is the next one that she sent me. Hi, Jeff. As a missionary, the Lord had inspired you to write that book. It wasn't a mistake. I read the book you gave to me, and it really inspired me a lot. I shared it on the radio, and some listeners requested for a copy, so I did some copy and gave it to them. I did receive a lot of positive feedback from them. May our good Lord continue to bless you in whatever you're doing. I now never knew someone would read a book that I was told to write on a radio show. Well, after we did leave and go up to Wewak, we were up there for 2 weeks. I then did go over to Balimo. When I showed up there, because I met someone at the university, the church there, he told me he was going to be in Balimo when I showed up, and then he said he will pick me up at the airport with his truck. But then, because he's a member of the church there in Balimo, they then asked me if I would preach there the very first Sabbath I showed up. And then I shared a lot with them, and then every single one of them got my books too at that church. But then I called Stephen Erickson and told him, tell NASA to come and pick me up on Monday, because I have to now come over there to go to the villages there. Well, when NASA picked me up, he then did tell me that, yes, you can preach the sermon at our church, the very first Sabbath now, in Kotali Village. Because NASA was one of our church members there. There's a story of him in my book too. And so, when I got there, Stephen asked me another question. He said, can you preach at my church this week? But I didn't want to leave my church, Kotali Church, because that's the only one that was ever created when we were living there. But I said, yes, I can do that. He even told me that there was some Cotali Village people that were coming there that time too. But then after I shared some with their church, every single church member did get my book. But then 2 days later, NASA told me something else. There's somebody in Kiowa Village that wants you to give them your book. And I said, okay, I can do that. And then he told me, my friend Tom is the one that's going to take me there. Tom and his wife, and then Tom's father-in-law and mother-in-law, they were the 4 members of that village that were members of our church when we were there as missionaries. But then I asked him, who is it that wants my book? Because I didn't know anybody would ask for my book. And he told me it's our village chief. Well, here in America, it would be a mayor. And so I just told him, yes, I'll do that. He then told me the reason he wants it is because he saw all those people walking down his village with my book. That then proved to me that, yes, that's why I had to preach the first sermon in Kiowa Village. Well, when I met him, I sat down with him in some big building that he built there. We talked for a little while, and then I gave him the book, but then I asked him a question. I said, is there anyone else that needs my book too? I did bring 3 books with me. He said, yes, so I gave him 2 more. Well, right after I gave them to him, he just told 2 people to come over. And then when they showed up, he said, here, you have to have the book, and you have to have the book. Well, after I left, I asked him, who did he give those books to? He told me, those are the 2 pastors of the Evangelical Church of Papua New Guinea. Now the village chief and 2 Sunday worshiping pastors all had my book. When I got back over to the Erickson's house, I walked over to their house and I saw Lori outside burning down a lot of her trash. And then I just told her, oh, now I know it's your village chief who wanted my book, and he even gave it to 2 pastors here. Then she told me something too. She said she had already read 1 year ago something that Ellen G. White wrote. After she told me what Ellen G. White said, we then did end up going into her house. Her husband was in there. And then I just asked him, what is the name of the book and what page is it? Because I want to read it exactly. But then Stephen told me the name and the page, and then said, I've already just looked it up, and now I'm going to text you what we read. And this is what he gave me. I have been instructed that the prophecies of Daniel and the Revelation should be printed in small books with the necessary explanations and should be sent all over the world. Those who eat the flesh and drink the blood of the Son of God will bring from the books of Daniel and Revelation truth that is inspired by the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
I actually wrote exactly what she told me Ellen G. White wrote, but I did not know she had ever written that. But that's what I did. And then I did tell NASA to take me to so many villages to share my book. And we actually went to 8 different villages. And so then every single one of my 700 books now were there. But because I have a lot of friends in Cotali Village, I did tell NASA I have to go back there to say goodbye to everybody. Well, when we were there, walking right down, getting close to his house, some lady was right there in front of her house. She walked over and asked me a question. She said, are you trying to meet John Kundari again? And I said, yes, I am. She was a member of our church in Cotali Village. She then told me that she has a friend, an attorney who lives in Port Moresby that does know John Kundari. And she is going to call him and tell him to tell John that I am going to show back up in Port Moresby. She asked me when I was going to show up, and I told her I'm going to show up there on March 5, but then on Friday, March 10, I am leaving, coming back to America. When I got there, I asked Pastor Obed, did John Podari contact you yet? And he said, no one has ever contacted me. But then eventually on Tuesday, someone did call me. Justin is his name. He told me, I am going to pick you up on Wednesday, March 8th, and I will take you over to see John Podari. Well, when I got there, I did show with him what I showed with you. But that girl, Liana, said that she read my book on his radio show. And then I showed him even what the Ericksons told me too. But then I asked him, can we get another picture of us, because I always like getting a picture with you. And he said yes. But then right after we took that picture, I took my shirt off and said, nope, I brought this for you. And he actually put it right on, and I was wearing it. But then I only met him for 4 hours and 30 minutes, but on that first day, on Wednesday. But then one time while I was there, he told me that he has to go to his bedroom for something. And then after he came back out, he said, Jeff, come over here and sit down at this other kitchen table. But I saw him carrying a big bag when he came out. When we sat down, he asked me a question. How much does it cost you to print this book in America? And I told him, oh, it would be 1 kina here in your country. That's how much it would cost me to print every book. But then he did something. He put his hand into that bag he was carrying out there. The very second that I saw his hand come out, I saw kina. He put it right in front of me on that table. And what he told me was, this is 10,000 kina. I will pay for you to print 10,000 books. Please mail them to me. I was not surprised that anyone now in New Guinea could maybe get my book, not just to go with other people. But then there is something else that happened. Last year, when I was at Adventist Frontier Missions in July, I asked them, who can schedule my flight to go back to New Guinea? And they told me, oh, her name is Kimmy. We'll give you her number and her email. Well, she did tell me that yes, she can do my flight. She asked me, what's my visa? And I said, it's 2 months. So she then scheduled my flight to leave on January 8th here in America, and then leave Port Moresby on March 7th. But she told me something that no one has ever told me. Before you go, I will just investigate your flight. Well, 2 weeks before I left, she had not contacted me, so I emailed her and asked her, have you done my flight schedule yet? And she said, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I told you. I would do that. I will do it right now. She then looked it up and then told me, your flight to leave Port Moresby on March 7th is canceled. She then told me, I will find some other time that you can leave there. But then she emailed me and said, the best day is March 10, but how is that going to work, because you only have a 2-month visa? But then I told her, because I'm leaving America on January 8th, it's already almost January 9 in New Guinea. So I will be showing up on January 10. So yes, March 10 is exactly 2 months. That then now proved to me that God probably canceled my flight to come back so I could see John Podari. Because I met him one day after I was already coming back to America. And then the second day too. When I got those 2 pictures on that shirt about the Obed River, I emailed both of those pictures to my friend Obed, and we emailed each other a lot. After I sent that email to him, he sent me an email, and what he said was, when I show up in America in April, can you take me to the Obed River to go swimming? I didn't know he was coming to America 1 month after I was leaving his house. But he did tell me that he has to go to Florida because Andrews University was having some meeting there. They were I'm teaching people something from April 17, April 27. So yes, I did pick him up on April 28, brought him up here, and that's a picture of me and him at our house here in Franklin. We even did go to the Obed River, but because I learned when I was still in New Guinea that he was coming to America, the first time ever in his life, I decided, because the Ericksons told me they want 1,000 books, I am going to start printing them so he can fly with them back to New Guinea. And so, because the Ericksons are the ones who told me they wanted those, I then printed 1,000. When he showed up, we did a lot of stuff together. I even traveled him from 7 different states. We went up to Michigan too. And so, then we took him to the airport on May 11. But then I had a question, because when I went to the airport in Nashville, I was flying from there to Los Angeles, and then there on Philippine Airlines to Manila, Philippines, and then from Manila to Port Moresby, and I asked them, will my suitcases have to be picked up in California or even in Manila? And what she told me was, no, they'll show up in Port Moresby. And they did. So now when I took Pastor Obed to the airport, his flight schedule was with American Airlines. He actually had to go up to Chicago, then to Los Angeles, then to Australia, and then from Australia right up to Port Moresby. He flew for 24 hours to Australia, and then just maybe 2 hours up to Port Moresby. But I then asked them the same question. Is his suitcases and those books going to show up in Port Moresby? And the guy told me, no, because it's American Airlines, they'll show up in Australia. He'll have to pick them up in Australia. At least now he knows where to pick them up. But then when he showed up in Australia, he sent me a text message and even called me on his WhatsApp. He told me there was a problem. That airplane was charging him $960 to take my books just for 2 hours up to Port Moresby. He then told me that's costing him 2,253 peanuts. He did tell me that he can't do that. I did not know what to do. But after I talked to him, I did tell my wife what happened, and just so both of us could pray for God to fix it. 1 hour and 50 minutes later, he sent me another text message. And this is exactly what he sent me. Michele, I saw God's hand today. I stood helplessly on the side, didn't know what to do, and suddenly a group of rugby players from Papua New Guinea showed up after playing with Australia. They showed me standing and they asked me. I told them my situation and they helped me, paid off the excess. Now I don't need to pay the 2,253 peanuts. I praise God. I did not know that sports players would show up and give him that much money to take my books to the beginning. But it does prove to me that God does want them to show up.
Yes.
I did tell you that I went to Kiowa Village and met the village chief, right? What's the village chief here in America?
Mayor?
A mayor? Oh, okay. Last year in November, there was some public meetings here in Franklin. They actually, they were going to do a new comprehensive plan. Well, for some reason I went there. The very first person who was standing up front made some statement. He said, thank you to everyone who was there, and we even have our mayor here. The mayor is Larry Dixon. After the meeting, I asked someone, who is the mayor? And that person said, oh, that's that guy right over there. I walked over there. He did shake my hand. I told him something. I told him that one of his employees, his name is Joey, he used to work for him right before he became the mayor. And then I told him, Joey worked for me before he came to work with you. I then asked him, can we meet together so I can share something with you? He said yes. About the second week in December last year, I did meet our mayor. I sat down with him for more than an hour, and I shared with him Daniel chapter 7. I even showed him this book and told him, do you want one? And he told me, yes, he does. And then I showed him this book. And I said, if you want this one, it does cost $10. He did give me $10. Our mayor in this city now has both of my books. We all have to pray that he will eventually agree that yes, the Sabbath is God's true day of worship. Because this book is, how many of you know Daniel 7? There's so much in Daniel 7 that it talks about that little horn is going to do. And I have at least 17 quotes in my book where the Catholic Church says, we change the Sabbath to Sunday. I did change my book. This is exactly one that I took to New Guinea, but now I've written something else on the back because now I'm just sharing that with people here too. And if any of you want the book, I do bring some with me so you can have them too, and you can give it to your dad if you want to. You don't have to, but you decide what you want to do.
Keep that in mind.
But, yes, God did hold my right hand and sent me in the direction that I needed to go. There were so many things that happened that I never made any of the decisions. It was just everything that God did when I was there. Now on my next visit to New Guinea. So our last hymn that we're going to do is number 388. Don't forget to say.